Karoline Leavitt was not your typical journalist. She had a knack for sniffing out stories that others might overlook, the kind of tales hidden in plain sight but packed with meaning. With her trusty notebook always tucked under her arm and a pen that seemed to never run out of ink, she traveled across the country looking for people whose lives told bigger truths about society. On this particular morning, however, Karoline wasn't chasing just any story. She was heading toward what promised to be one of her most challenging interviews yet. The air smelled fresh as she drove down a narrow country road lined with tall oak trees. The golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting playful shadows on the windshield. Her destination? A small farm owned by a man locals simply called the farmer. He had gained attention recently because of his refusal to adopt modern farming techniques like chemical fertilizers and genetically modified crops. While many praised him for sticking to traditional methods, others accused him of being stuck in the past. It was exactly the kind of debate Karoline loved diving into, a clash between old values and new ideas. Pulling up to the farm, Karoline parked her car near an old red barn that looked like it had stood there for decades. Chickens clucked lazily nearby, pecking at the ground, while a gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. As she stepped out of her car, she spotted the farmer walking toward her. Dressed in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt, he wiped his hands on a rag before extending one to greet her. His face was weathered from years spent outdoors, but his eyes were sharp, full of conviction. "Morning," he said gruffly, giving her a firm handshake. "Good morning," Karoline replied, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. "Thanks for agreeing to talk to me." They started walking toward the fields where rows of crops stretched endlessly before them. The farmer gestured proudly at his land, explaining how every inch of it was nurtured without chemicals or shortcuts. But Karoline wasn't here to admire the scenery. She was here to ask tough questions. "So why do you stick to these old-school methods?" she asked, flipping open her notebook. "I mean, wouldn't using fertilizers make things easier and more profitable?" The farmer stopped mid-step and turned to face her. There was a flicker of irritation in his expression, though he kept his tone even. "Easier, sure. Profitable? Maybe. But at what cost? You think dumping chemicals into the ground is good for the future? For the kids who will inherit this land?" Karoline raised an eyebrow, jotting down notes. "But progress is important too, right? Isn't it better to adapt rather than cling to outdated ways?" That's when the conversation took a turn. What began as a casual interview quickly escalated into a heated back and forth. The farmer argued passionately about sustainability, warning against practices that prioritized short-term gains over long-term consequences. Karoline countered with logic, pointing out how innovation could solve problems faster and feed more people. Each point they made only fueled the other's rebuttal, their voices rising until they were practically shouting over the rustling wheat stalks. Workers tending to the fields glanced over curiously, sensing the tension brewing between the two. Neither Karoline nor the farmer noticed. They were too caught up in their own battle of ideals. Words flew like arrows, each side determined to prove their perspective was the right one. It felt less like an interview now and more like a verbal tug-of-war, with neither willing to let go. Despite the growing frustration, something strange happened during their argument. A sudden gust of wind swept across the field, sending papers flying out of Karoline's notebook. Pages fluttered everywhere, scattering across the dirt path and getting caught in tufts of grass. Both froze mid-sentence, the sound of the wind momentarily silencing their heated exchange. For a brief moment, all that existed was the quiet chaos of nature around them. Then, almost instinctively, both bent down to pick up the scattered papers. Their hands brushed once or twice as they reached for the same sheet, and they exchanged awkward smiles. It was a small gesture, but it broke the intensity of the moment. As they gathered the last of the papers, the farmer straightened up and cleared his throat. "Look, I didn't mean to come off so harsh earlier," he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. Karoline nodded, tucking the recovered pages back into her notebook. "And I probably pushed too hard. Guess we're both pretty stubborn, huh?" A hint of a grin spread across the farmer's face. "Yeah, well, maybe there's room for both our views somewhere in the middle." With the tension eased, the farmer surprised Karoline by inviting her to join him for lunch at his farmhouse. At first, she hesitated. It wasn't part of her plan, but curiosity got the better of her. She wanted to understand where he was coming from beyond the fields and arguments. So, nodding slowly, she accepted. Little did she know, this simple meal would change everything. The farmhouse was modest but warm, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. As Karoline stepped inside, she noticed how everything had its own story to tell. The wooden table bore scratches from years of use. The curtains were faded, but clean, and a pot of something savory simmered on the stove, filling the air with a comforting aroma. It wasn't fancy, but it felt real, exactly like the man who lived there. "Have a seat," the farmer said, pulling out a chair for her before heading to the kitchen counter. He grabbed 2 plates and ladled out hearty portions of stew, along with thick slices of homemade bread still warm from the oven. "Nothing fancy, just what we grow and cook around here." Karoline smiled faintly as she settled into the chair. For someone who had been so fiery in the field earlier, he now seemed almost gentle, moving about the kitchen with practiced ease. She couldn't help but notice how different this side of him was compared to the stubborn figure she'd debated with only an hour ago. As they ate, the conversation shifted away from farming altogether. Instead of talking about crops or chemicals, they found themselves sharing pieces of their lives. The farmer spoke about growing up on this very land, learning the ropes from his father and grandfather before him. His voice softened when he mentioned how much the farm meant to him, not just as a source of income, but as a legacy he hoped to pass on someday. Karoline listened intently, nodding as she took small bites of the delicious stew. When it was her turn to speak, she opened up about her own journey. She told him how she'd always been drawn to storytelling because it allowed her to explore different perspectives. Journalism wasn't just a job for her, it was a way to connect with people and understand the world beyond headlines and sound bites. For a while, neither of them brought up farming techniques or sustainability. They laughed over shared experiences, like childhood memories of climbing trees or getting lost during family road trips. At one point, the farmer chuckled as he recalled accidentally tipping over a wheelbarrow full of apples as a kid, sending them rolling everywhere. Karoline grinned, admitting she'd once tried to bake a cake for her parents and ended up burning it so badly that even the smoke alarm gave up. It was strange, really. Just hours earlier, they had been shouting at each other under the open sky, convinced the other person was wrong. Now, sitting across from each other at this worn-out table, they discovered they weren't so different after all. Both cared deeply about their work. Both wanted to leave the world a little better than they found it, and both carried scars from battles fought along the way. After lunch, the farmer suggested showing Karoline more of the farm. "You've seen the fields," he said, standing up and stretching. "But there's more to this place than rows of crops." Curious, Karoline followed him outside. This time, instead of heading back to the main fields, they walked toward a quieter part of the property. Here, wildflowers grew freely alongside patches of vegetables, creating a colorful tapestry of nature's design. Butterflies flitted lazily between blooms and bees buzzed contentedly from flower to flower. "This is my favorite spot," the farmer admitted, gesturing around them. "I let things grow naturally here. No interference, no chemicals. Just life doing its thing." Karoline tilted her head, studying the scene. "Why keep this area untouched? Wouldn't you get more yield if you planted crops here too?" He shook his head, crouching down to examine a cluster of wild daisies. "Not everything has to be about yield. These flowers support pollinators, bees, butterflies, birds. Without them, none of the crops would thrive. See those sunflowers over there?" He pointed to a patch of towering yellow blooms. "They attract ladybugs, which eat aphids. Nature balances itself if you give it a chance." She nodded slowly, starting to see what he meant. There was a beauty in letting things exist without forcing them into boxes, or rows in this case. The idea of working with nature rather than against it began to make sense in a way it hadn't before. As they continued walking, the farmer explained other parts of his approach. He showed her a small pond where frogs lived, helping control pests naturally. Nearby, a compost pile turned food scraps and plant waste into rich fertilizer. Even the chickens played a role, scratching through the soil and eating bugs while leaving behind nutrient-rich droppings. "You're not just farming," Karoline said finally, breaking the silence. "You're building an ecosystem." The farmer looked at her, a hint of pride in his eyes. "That's exactly it. Farming isn't just about growing food, it's about nurturing life. If we take care of the land, it'll take care of us." By the time they headed back to the farmhouse, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Karoline felt a quiet shift within herself. What had started as a confrontational interview had turned into something deeper, a lesson in listening, understanding, and seeing the bigger picture. Back at her car, she paused before getting in. Turning to the farmer, she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for showing me your world today. I think I needed to see it." He shook her hand firmly, a knowing smile on his face. "And thanks for coming out here. Not many folks bother to listen anymore." As Karoline drove away, the image of the vibrant wildflower patch stayed with her. She realized she'd walked into the day expecting to write another article about conflict, but now she wasn't so sure. Maybe this story wasn't about who was right or wrong. Maybe it was about finding common ground even in the unlikeliest of places. The drive back to the city felt longer than usual. Karoline's mind was buzzing with thoughts, replaying every moment of the day in vivid detail. The heated debate in the field, the unexpected lunch at the farmhouse, and the quiet beauty of the wildflower patch. It all swirled together like a mosaic she couldn't quite piece into place yet. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she wrestled with how to tell this story. When she finally reached her apartment, the sun had long since set, leaving the room bathed in soft lamplight. Dropping her bag on the couch, she flopped down and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't going to be an easy article to write. For once, there wasn't a clear villain or hero. No black and white narrative to neatly package for readers. Instead, what she'd witnessed was messy, complicated, and deeply human. Karoline grabbed her laptop and opened a blank document. At first, nothing came. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure where to begin. How could she capture the essence of that day without oversimplifying it? After a few minutes, she decided to start by jotting down raw notes. No filters, no judgment, just words pouring straight from her heart. Old methods versus new, she typed. Tradition versus progress, but is it really that simple? As the cursor blinked patiently, waiting for more input, Karoline leaned back in her chair and sighed. Writing had always been her escape, her way of making sense of the world. Yet tonight, even the act of stringing sentences together felt daunting. She closed her eyes, letting the farmer's voice echo in her mind. If we take care of the land, it'll take care of us. Something about those words struck a chord deep within her. Maybe it wasn't just about farming after all. Maybe it was about balance, a delicate dance between respecting the past while embracing the future. That thought gave her enough momentum to keep going. She began drafting, slowly at first, then faster as ideas flowed. Rather than framing the piece as a critique or exposé, she chose to let the farmer's philosophy shine through. She wrote about his dedication to preserving biodiversity, describing the vibrant ecosystem he had nurtured on his farm. She included anecdotes from their conversation, the passionate arguments, the moments of laughter, and the subtle shifts in perspective they both experienced throughout the day. But Karoline didn't stop there. She also wove in her own reflections, admitting her initial biases and how they softened as she learned more. She described the wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze, the frogs croaking near the pond, and the bees buzzing lazily among the sunflowers. These details weren't just filler. They were proof that life thrived when given the chance to exist naturally. Hours passed unnoticed as she worked, completely absorbed in the task. By the time she hit save, dawn was creeping through her window, casting a pale glow across the room. Exhausted but satisfied, Karoline stretched and reread what she'd written. It wasn't perfect, but it felt authentic, a true reflection of the day she'd spent on the farm. A few days later, the article went live online, titled Beyond Yield, One Farmer's Quiet Revolution. It quickly gained traction. Readers were captivated not only by the farmer's unconventional methods, but also by Karoline's honest portrayal of their interaction. Comments poured in, ranging from praise for the farmer's commitment to sustainability to heartfelt messages thanking Karoline for highlighting the importance of listening to opposing viewpoints. One comment stood out to her in particular. "This made me rethink my assumptions about farming. I've always thought bigger yields meant better results, but maybe there's value in slowing down and working with nature instead of against it." Reading those words filled Karoline with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. As a journalist, she knew the power of storytelling, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just another article. It was a bridge connecting two worlds that often misunderstood each other. Meanwhile, miles away in the countryside, the farmer sat at his kitchen table sipping coffee while reading the article on his phone. A slow smile spread across his face as he scrolled through Karoline's words. He appreciated how she had captured not only his methods but also the spirit behind them. When he reached the part where she admitted her initial skepticism, he chuckled softly. "Stubborn reporter," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head fondly. Word spread quickly among local farmers too. Some were skeptical at first, dismissing the piece as overly idealistic. But others visited the farm to see for themselves, curious about the man who inspired such thoughtful discussion. One young couple, eager to start their own sustainable operation, showed up unannounced, one afternoon with questions scribbled on a notepad. The farmer welcomed them warmly, happy to share what he'd learned over decades of trial and error. Over time, the farm became something of a hub for like-minded individuals seeking alternatives to industrial agriculture. Workshops popped up regularly, drawing participants from neighboring towns and even distant cities. People gathered to learn about crop rotation, natural pest control, and soil regeneration. What started as a personal mission for the farmer had grown into a movement, one rooted in collaboration rather than competition. Back in the city, Karoline continued writing, but her approach changed subtly. She found herself drawn to stories that explored gray areas, ones that challenged readers to think critically and empathetically. Whether covering education reform, urban development, or healthcare access, she sought to highlight voices often overlooked in mainstream narratives. Each assignment became an opportunity to foster understanding rather than division. Months later, on a crisp winter evening, Karoline received an email from the farmer. Attached was a photo of the wildflower, patch blanketed in snow, its dormant stems whispering promises of spring. In the message, he thanked her for helping bring attention to his work and invited her to visit again whenever she wanted. Her response was brief but heartfelt. "Thank you for reminding me why I love what I do. I'll be back soon. I wouldn't miss seeing those flowers bloom." That night, as she tucked her phone away, Karoline realized something profound. Stories weren't just about informing or entertaining. They were about connection. They had the power to heal divides, spark change, and remind us of our shared humanity. And sometimes the most unexpected encounters, like a heated debate turned friendship, could leave the deepest mark of all. The months rolled by and winter gave way to spring. The world outside Karoline's city apartment began to bloom again, mirroring the changes happening within her own life. Since publishing the article about the farmer, she had noticed a shift, not just in how people responded to her work, but in how she approached it herself. Her inbox was flooded with emails from readers who wanted to share their thoughts or ask questions. Some were inspired to start gardens in their backyards. Others expressed interest in sustainable living practices they'd never considered before. But what surprised Karoline most were the invitations that followed. Local community groups asked her to speak at events about storytelling and its role in bridging divides. Schools reached out, hoping she could talk to students about journalism as a tool for understanding different perspectives. At first she hesitated. Public speaking wasn't exactly her strong suit, but something inside her urged her to say yes. Maybe it was the memory of standing in that wildflower patch, realizing how much one conversation could ripple outward. One Saturday morning, she found herself addressing a small crowd gathered in a cozy library auditorium. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. Karoline adjusted the microphone nervously before beginning her talk. She started by recounting the day she visited, the farm, the heated debate, the unexpected lunch, and the lessons she took away from the experience. "I went there thinking I knew what the story was," she admitted, pacing slowly across the stage. "I thought it would be another tale of conflict between tradition and progress, but what I found instead was nuance, complexity, humanity." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. A few people nodded, leaning forward slightly in their seats. Encouraged, Karoline continued, "We live in a world that loves simple answers, good versus bad, right versus wrong. But real life rarely works like that. Sometimes the truth lies somewhere in between, and getting there means listening even when it's hard." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, drawing strength from the attentive faces in front of her. By the end of the session, several attendees lingered to ask follow-up questions or thank her for sharing her insights. One elderly woman clasped Karoline's hand tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You reminded me why it's so important to keep learning," she said softly. "Thank you." Karoline left the library feeling lighter, as if a weight she hadn't realized she carried had been lifted. It wasn't just about the praise, it was knowing that her words had resonated, that they might inspire someone else to look at the world differently. That feeling stayed with her long after the event ended. Back on the farm, spring brought new energy too. The farmer spent his days preparing the soil for planting, his hands caked with dirt as he worked alongside a growing team of volunteers. Many of them were young people eager to learn sustainable farming techniques, drawn to the farm after reading Karoline's article. They came from all walks of life: college students studying environmental science, retired teachers looking for a new purpose, even office workers seeking an escape from the grind of city life. Despite their varied backgrounds, they shared a common goal: to create something meaningful. Under the farmer's guidance, they planted rows of vegetables, sowed seeds for wildflowers, and built raised beds for herbs. Each task was done with care, emphasizing harmony with nature rather than domination over it. Evenings were spent gathered around a crackling fire, sharing meals and stories under a canopy of stars. For the farmer, these moments felt like validation. He had always believed in the importance of passing down knowledge, but seeing it come to life in such a tangible way filled him with pride. When one volunteer, a quiet young man named Alex, asked if he could stay on permanently to help run the farmer couldn't suppress a grin. "Looks like we've got ourselves a partner," he joked, clapping Alex on the shoulder. As summer approached, the farm buzzed with activity. News of its success spread further, attracting visitors from neighboring states. Tour buses occasionally pulled up, disgorging curious tourists eager to see the famous wildflower patch and hear the farmer's story firsthand. While some locals grumbled about the influx of outsiders, the farmer welcomed them warmly, viewing it as an opportunity to spread awareness about sustainable practices. Amidst the bustle, Karoline kept her promise to return. On a warm June afternoon, she drove down the familiar country road, her heart skipping a beat as she spotted the red barn in the distance. Pulling into the driveway, she stepped out of her car to find the farmer waiting for her, a broad smile on his face. "Knew you'd come back," he teased, offering her a glass of lemonade. "Thought you might want to see the place in full bloom." And bloom it did. The fields stretched endlessly, vibrant greens dotted with bursts of color from blooming flowers. Bees hummed lazily, and birds chirped overhead, creating a symphony of life. As they walked together, the farmer pointed out areas where volunteers had made improvements: new irrigation systems, expanded wildflower zones, and even a small greenhouse for seedlings. "It's amazing," Karoline said, shaking, her head in awe. "I can't believe how much has changed since I was last here." The farmer shrugged modestly. People are hungry for change, he replied. They just need a little push sometimes. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, sipping tea and watching fireflies dance in the twilight. The conversation turned reflective, each of them musing on how far they'd come since their fiery debate months earlier. "You know," Karoline said after a long pause, "I think we both learned something that day. You taught me to slow down and appreciate the bigger picture, and maybe I helped you see that not everyone who disagrees with you is trying to tear you down." The farmer chuckled, tipping his hat back. "Guess we're lucky we didn't scare each other off, huh?" They shared a laugh, the kind born of mutual respect and understanding. In that moment, surrounded by the sights and sounds of the farm, Karoline realized something profound. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come without effort. But when two people committed to truly hearing each other, magic could unfold, in the form of wildflowers, thriving ecosystems, or even friendships forged in unlikely places. As the stars began to twinkle above, Karoline leaned back in her chair, feeling a deep sense of peace. This farm, this farmer, and this journey, they weren't just part of a story anymore. They were reminders that even in a divided world, connection was possible. All it took was a willingness to listen, to learn, and to meet halfway. And sometimes, that meeting point was right in the middle of a field, beneath an endless sky. The weeks that followed Karoline's visit to the farm were a whirlwind of activity for both her and the farmer. For Karoline, the success of her article opened doors she hadn't anticipated. Editors from larger publications reached out, eager to collaborate on similar stories. She was invited to panel discussions about sustainability in media, and even offered a spot as a guest lecturer at a university journalism program. At first, she hesitated. This level of attention felt foreign and overwhelming, but the farmer's words echoed in her mind. People are hungry for change. If her work could inspire others to think differently, wasn't that worth stepping out of her comfort zone? Meanwhile, back on the farm, life continued its steady rhythm. The farmer found himself busier than ever, juggling daily chores with mentoring volunteers and hosting visitors. Despite the chaos, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in everything he did. He often caught himself smiling as he watched newcomers marvel at the wildflowers or excitedly point out bees buzzing around the sunflowers. It reminded him of why he'd stuck to his principles all these years, even when it meant standing alone against critics who dismissed his methods as impractical. One crisp morning, as dew clung to the blades of grass, the farmer received an unexpected delivery. A package arrived containing a copy of the latest issue of a well-known environmental magazine. Flipping through the glossy pages, he stopped short when he saw Karoline's name beneath a headline that read, "Harvesting. Hope, how one farm is redefining sustainability." The article wasn't just about his farm, it was a celebration of the movement it had sparked. Photos of the fields, volunteers hard at work, and close-ups of vibrant crops filled the spread, accompanied by quotes from people whose lives had been touched by the farm. He sat down heavily on the porch steps, reading every word twice. When he finished, he leaned back and exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of pride and humility. This wasn't just recognition for him, it was validation for everyone who believed in the power of working with nature instead of against it. Later that day, he called Karoline to thank her. "You didn't have to do this," he said gruffly over the phone, though his tone betrayed his gratitude. "But I'm glad you did." Karoline laughed softly. "I didn't write it for you," she replied. "I wrote it for everyone who needs to hear that change is possible." Their conversation drifted naturally into plans for another collaboration, a documentary project highlighting sustainable farms across the country. The idea had been brewing in Karoline's mind for months, inspired by the response to her earlier article. With the farmer's blessing, they decided to make his farm the centerpiece of the series, showcasing not only its practices but also the community it had built. Filming began in late summer, bringing a crew of filmmakers and sound technicians to the countryside. For someone used to quiet solitude, the sudden influx of cameras and microphones took some getting used to. But the farmer adapted quickly. finding humor in the situation. "Never thought I'd be starring in a movie," he joked one afternoon, adjusting a lapel mic pinned to his shirt. "Guess I'll need to practice my Oscar speech." The process brought challenges, of course. Rainstorms, delayed shoots, equipment malfunctioned, and the sheer exhaustion of long days left everyone drained. Yet through it all, there was an undeniable energy driving them forward. Volunteers pitched in wherever they could, holding reflectors or carrying gear. Children played tag among the rows of crops while their parents shared stories with the filmmakers. Even the animals seemed to get in on the action, with chickens wandering into shots and goats photobombing interviews. Karoline stayed close throughout filming, acting as both a consultant and a participant. Watching the farmer interact with the crew and share his philosophy with such authenticity, she couldn't help but feel proud. Here was a man who had once been dismissed as old-fashioned, now standing confidently in front of a camera, proving that tradition and innovation weren't mutually exclusive. As the final day of filming approached, the team gathered for a farewell dinner under strings of twinkling fairy lights strung between trees. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes prepared by volunteers, roasted vegetables, crusty bread, and pies bursting with seasonal fruits. Laughter filled the air as people swapped stories and toasted to the journey ahead. Sitting beside the farmer, Karoline raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice warm, "and to proving that sometimes the best way forward is to look back and learn from what came before." The farmer nodded, clinking his glass against hers. "And to stubborn reporters who refused to let us off easy." Everyone laughed, the sound carrying far into the night. As the celebration wound down, Karoline wandered away from the crowd, drawn to the edge of the field where the wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze. Standing there, she felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the land but to the people who had poured their hearts into nurturing it. This place had become more than a farm. It was a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and hope. And, though the documentary was still months away from release, she already knew its impact would ripple far beyond the screen. Stories like this had a way of planting seeds in people's minds, encouraging them to imagine a better future, and perhaps take small steps toward creating it themselves. As the stars blinked overhead, Karoline realized something important. Change wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It was about moments, the quiet conversations, the shared meals, the acts of kindness that reminded us we weren't so different after all. Whether in the city or the countryside, amidst skyscrapers or sunflower fields, those moments were what truly mattered. With a contented sigh, she turned and headed back toward the farmhouse, ready to embrace whatever came next. The months leading up to the documentary's release were a blur of anticipation and hard work. Karoline spent countless hours in editing rooms, piecing together footage that captured not just the beauty of the farm, but also the spirit of the people who called it home. She wanted every frame to feel alive, every word spoken by the farmer and his volunteers to resonate with authenticity. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she doubted whether the final product would do justice to the story, but the team's shared passion kept them going. Meanwhile, life on the farm carried on as usual. The farmer returned to his daily routines, though now he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. Knowing that their efforts would soon reach an even wider audience filled him with quiet pride. He often caught himself thinking about the ripple effect this project might have. Would someone watching decide to start their own garden, or reconsider how they thought about food production? These questions lingered in his mind as he worked under the wide-open sky. When the day finally arrived, for the documentary's premiere, excitement buzzed through both the city and the countryside. In town, a local theater hosted a special screening event, complete with panel discussions featuring Karoline and several sustainability advocates. Back at the farm, volunteers and neighbors gathered around a projector set up outdoors, blankets spread across the grass as they prepared to watch together beneath the stars. Karoline stood nervously outside the theater before the screening began, adjusting her scarf and trying to calm her racing heart. This wasn't just another article or lecture. It was something bigger, something tangible. As people filed into the theater, many stopped to thank her for shining a light on sustainable practices. One woman clasped her hands tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "You've given us hope," she whispered. "Thank you." Inside, the lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. From the opening scenes, a sweeping shot of golden fields bathed in morning sunlight, to the candid interviews with volunteers sharing their personal journeys, the documentary gripped the audience from start to finish. When the credits rolled, the room erupted into applause. People lingered afterward, reluctant to leave, eager to discuss what they'd seen and how it had moved them. At the farm, the reaction was no less powerful. As the final scene faded to black, silence fell over the crowd for a moment before cheers broke out. Volunteers hugged each other, some wiping away tears, others laughing with relief. The farmer sat quietly, staring at the blank screen for a long while before turning to Karoline, who had joined them for the evening. "Well?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "What do you think?" She smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we did it." Word of the documentary spread quickly after its release. Social media platforms lit up with posts praising the film, while news outlets highlighted its message of balance and collaboration. Viewers wrote heartfelt messages online, sharing how it inspired them to make changes in their own lives. Some vowed to support local farmers, others committed to reducing waste or planting trees. Even critics of sustainable farming admitted the documentary made them rethink their stance. For Karoline, the response was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. She received emails from teachers wanting to use clips in their classrooms, parents asking for advice on introducing kids to environmentalism, and aspiring journalists seeking guidance on telling impactful stories. Each message reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling to create connections and spark action. Back on the farm, things began to change too. Donations poured in from supporters eager to help expand operations. With the extra funds, the farmer was able to purchase new equipment, build additional greenhouses, and hire more full-time staff. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the influx of young people eager to learn. Internship applications flooded in, and soon the farm became a hub of education and innovation. One such intern was a quiet teenager named Alex, whose family had struggled financially for years. Drawn to the farm after seeing the documentary, he saw it as a chance to escape the monotony of his small-town life. At first, he kept mostly to himself, unsure if he belonged among the seasoned volunteers. But the farmer took him under his wing, teaching him everything from soil health to crop rotation. Over time, Alex blossomed, gaining confidence and discovering a passion for sustainable agriculture. "You're going to be running places like this one day," the farmer told him one afternoon, patting him on the back. "Mark my words." Alex grinned, blushing slightly. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you." As autumn settled in, painting the landscape in hues of orange and red, Karoline returned to the farm for another visit. This time, she came, not as a journalist chasing a story, but as a friend checking in on old companions. Walking through the fields, she marveled at how much had grown, not just the crops, but the community itself. Children ran freely among the rows, chasing butterflies and picking wildflowers. Volunteers laughed and joked as they worked, their camaraderie evident in every interaction. That evening, the group gathered around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Someone brought out a guitar, and soon, melodies floated through the cool night air. Karoline sat cross-legged on a blanket, sipping hot cocoa and soaking in the atmosphere. It felt like home, a place where differences faded away, replaced by a shared commitment to something greater than themselves. Later, as the fire crackled low, Karoline pulled the farmer aside for a quiet chat. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" she asked, gazing up at the star-studded sky. He chuckled, leaning against a fence post. "Every day. But I figure, as long as we keep listening and learning, we'll find our way." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. This journey, from heated debate to unexpected friendship, from skepticism to collaboration, had taught her more than she ever imagined. It reminded her that progress wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, about showing up, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. As the night wore on, Karoline found herself reflecting on the interconnectedness of it all. The farmer's dedication to the land, the volunteers' willingness to embrace new ideas, the viewers inspired to take action. All of it wove together into a tapestry of hope. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, one step at a time. Under the vast expanse of stars, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Karoline realized something profound. Sometimes, the smallest seeds planted in the right soil could grow into forests, and maybe, just maybe, those forests could shelter generations to come. Winter arrived quietly, wrapping the farm in a blanket of frost. The fields lay dormant, their vibrant colors muted beneath a layer of white. But even in this season of rest, life buzzed with quiet purpose. Inside the farmhouse, volunteers gathered around steaming mugs of tea, planning for spring. Outside, chickens pecked at stray kernels of corn left behind after the harvest, and goats huddled together in their cozy pen, exhaling puffs of warm breath into the crisp air. For Karoline, winter was a time of reflection. Back in the city, she found herself drawn to her window more often than usual, staring out at the gray skies and thinking about the farm. Her desk was cluttered with notes from recent interviews, stories inspired by the documentary that had taken on lives of their own. Yet, no matter how busy she became, part of her always seemed tethered to that patch of land where wildflowers once swayed and debates turned into friendships. One snowy afternoon, she received an unexpected package in the mail. Opening it revealed a handmade photo album filled with snapshots from the farm. Sun-drenched fields, volunteers laughing during planting sessions, close-ups of bees hovering over blossoms. There were also candid shots of her, scribbling notes under a tree, standing beside the farmer as they surveyed the crops, sharing a laugh over lunch. A handwritten note tucked inside read simply, "Thanks for helping us grow." Karoline traced the words with her fingers, feeling a lump rise in her throat. It wasn't just gratitude. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that change didn't happen alone. It took people willing to listen, to learn, and to lean into discomfort when necessary. For so long, she'd thought of herself as merely an observer, someone who told stories without truly being part of them. But now she realized she'd become something more, a participant in a collective effort to leave the world better than she'd found it. Meanwhile, back on the farm, the farmer spent his days preparing for the future. He worked alongside Alex, teaching him advanced techniques for managing soil health and crop rotation. Together, they mapped out plans for next year's planting season, envisioning new ways to expand sustainable practices while maintaining harmony with nature. Though he still missed the simplicity of working alone, the farmer couldn't deny the joy he felt watching others take ownership of the land. "You know," Alex said one morning as they shoveled compost into wheelbarrows, "I never thought I'd end up here, but now, I can't imagine doing anything else." The farmer paused, leaning on his shovel. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes you stumble onto exactly what you need, even if you didn't know you were looking for it." Alex nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, and sometimes someone has to show you the way." By early spring, signs of renewal were everywhere. Snow melted into rivulets that fed the soil, and green shoots began poking through the thawing earth. Volunteers returned in droves, eager to resume work after months away. Among them were familiar faces and newcomers alike, each bringing fresh energy and ideas. The farm buzzed with activity once again, a testament to resilience and hope. Karoline made her way back for another visit, arriving just as the first wildflowers began to bloom. Stepping out of her car, she was greeted not only by the farmer, but also by a group of children playing tag near the barn. Their laughter echoed across the fields, mingling with the chirping of birds returning from their winter migration. It was impossible not to smile. "Looks like things are picking up around here," she remarked, pulling her scarf tighter against the lingering chill. The farmer grinned, gesturing toward the horizon. "Always do this time of year. Feels good to see everything waking up again." They walked together through the budding fields, catching up on all that had happened since her last visit. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence as they both soaked in the beauty of the awakening landscape. When they reached the wildflower patch, Karoline stopped, taking in the sight before her. Tiny buds stretched skyward, promising bursts of color in the weeks to come. "It's funny," she said softly. "When I first came here, I thought this place was about farming, about arguments over methods and yields, but now I realize it's about something bigger." The farmer raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Connection. Between people. Between generations. Between us and the land. This farm isn't just growing food, it's growing relationships. Trust. Hope." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Never thought of it that way before. But I reckon you're right." As the day wore on, they joined the others for a shared meal under the open sky. Plates piled high with hearty stews and freshly baked bread passed from hand to hand, accompanied by lively chatter and bursts of laughter. Sitting cross-legged on a blanket, Karoline felt a deep sense of belonging, a reminder that some bonds transcended geography or circumstance. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Karoline stood alone for a moment, gazing out at the land bathed in golden light. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from heated debates to heartfelt collaborations, from skepticism to understanding. It hadn't been easy, but then again, nothing worth doing ever was. In that quiet moment, she realized something profound. The real story wasn't hers or the farmer's. It belonged to everyone who dared to listen, to adapt, to believe in the possibility of change. Whether in the city or the countryside, whether holding a pen or a plow, we all played a role in shaping the world around us. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The rhythm of life on the farm carried forward, steady and unwavering as spring gave way to summer. The days grew longer, filled with golden sunlight and the hum of activity. Crops flourished under careful hands, their growth a testament to patience and perseverance. Wildflowers bloomed in vibrant clusters, attracting bees and butterflies that danced between petals. But it wasn't just the land that thrived. The community did too, expanding beyond what anyone had imagined. Karoline visited often, finding herself drawn back time and again. Each trip felt like coming home, even though her actual home was miles away in the city. She'd sit on the porch with the farmer, sipping lemonade and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they discussed the latest developments at the farm. New volunteers arriving, plans for fall workshops, or ideas for improving irrigation systems. Other times they simply watched the horizon, letting the quiet moments speak for themselves. One afternoon, as they wandered through the fields together, Karoline noticed something different. A small wooden sign had been placed near the wildflower patch, its surface freshly painted with bold letters, "Hope blooms here." She stopped short, tilting her head to read it again. "This is new," she said, turning to the farmer with a smile. He shrugged modestly, though his eyes twinkled. "Thought it might be nice to remind folks why we're doing all this. Not just growing food, but growing hope." Karoline nodded slowly, her chest tightening with emotion. Simple words, yet profound enough to capture the essence of everything they'd built together over the past year. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. A belief that even in uncertain times, there was always room for renewal and possibility. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the farm hosted another gathering. This one was special, an anniversary celebration marking a full year since the documentary's release. People came from far and wide, some driving hours to be there. Volunteers who had moved on to start their own projects returned to reconnect. Neighbors brought dishes to share, filling long tables with homemade pies, roasted vegetables, and steaming casseroles. Under strings of fairy lights strung between trees, laughter echoed into the night. Children chased fireflies while adults swapped stories around bonfires. Someone brought out a guitar, and soon voices joined together in song, harmonizing beneath the starlit sky. Karoline stood off to the side, watching it all unfold, her heart swelling with gratitude. The farmer eventually found her holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Figured you could use this," he said, handing her one. "It's getting chilly." She accepted it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "Thanks, and thank you for everything else." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "For showing me what really matters," she replied softly. "For reminding me that progress isn't about winning arguments. It's about building bridges, about listening when it's hard and finding common ground when it feels impossible." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You make it sound like I did all the work. Truth is, you helped me see things differently too. You pushed me to explain myself better, to think about how my actions affect others. That's no small thing." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind born of mutual respect and understanding. Around them, the party continued, alive with energy and connection. Yet in that moment, standing side by side, they both felt a deep sense of peace. Neither of them had set out to change the world. They'd simply followed their instincts, trusting that doing what felt right would lead somewhere meaningful. As the night wore on, Karoline found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of their journey. The farm had become more than a place. It was a symbol of resilience, collaboration, and hope. Its story had inspired countless others to take action in their own lives, whether by starting gardens, supporting local farmers, or rethinking their relationship with nature. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, armed with the lessons they'd learned along the way. Months later, as autumn painted the landscape once again, Karoline sat at her desk in the city, staring at a blank page. Her editor had asked her to write a follow-up piece about the farm's impact, but she struggled to find the right words. How could she possibly capture the depth of what had happened over the past year? Finally, she decided to start with the truth, simple, honest, and human. "It began with a debate," she typed, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. "Two people standing on opposite sides of an issue, convinced they were right. What neither of us realized then was that arguments aren't always meant to be won. Sometimes they're meant to open doors, to understanding, to empathy, to change." As she wrote, memories flooded back. Heated exchanges in the field, quiet conversations over meals, the joy of seeing wildflowers bloom after a long winter. She described the farmers' unwavering dedication, the volunteers' enthusiasm, and the countless ways their efforts had touched lives. By the end of the article, tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. When the piece went live, it resonated deeply with readers. Comments poured in, thanking her for reminding them of the power of connection and collaboration. One message stood out among the rest. "Your story made me realize that change starts small. With one conversation, one decision, one step toward something better. Thank you for showing us that hope can grow anywhere, even in unlikely places." Reading those words, Karoline smiled. It wasn't fame or recognition she sought. It was knowing that her work mattered, that it could inspire others to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of city life outside her window, she felt grounded. Grounded in the knowledge that even the smallest seeds, planted with care, could take root and flourish. Back on the farm, the farmer hung a copy of Karoline's latest article on the wall of the farmhouse, taping it beside the photo album she'd sent months earlier. Visitors often paused to read it, smiling as they recognized themselves in the story. For him, it was proof that their efforts weren't just making a difference locally, they were sparking change far beyond the fields. As winter approached once more, bringing frost and stillness, Karoline received another invitation. This time, it wasn't just to visit, it was to stay. The farmer had asked if she'd consider spending part of the upcoming planting season at the farm, helping document their progress and mentoring new volunteers. She hesitated at first, weighing the responsibilities of her city life against the pull of the countryside. But deep down she already knew her answer. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I'll come." And so, the cycle continued. a story of growth, connection, and hope, written not just in ink, but in the soil, the sky, and the hearts of everyone who dared to dream of a better tomorrow.